Hello all, welcome to the IPython Jupyter developer meeting for Tuesday, April 14th, 2015. And it sounds like we are becoming more Jupyterish and less IPythonish due to the recent split and reorganization of the main IPython repository into lots of smaller repositories, many of which are now under the Jupyter branding.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's a lot of the topic for today.
So I don't know if we want to spend, I don't know how much time we want to spend. I put a bunch of notes here, and I also drafted a blog post on the ghost thing just to try that out. Going through it. So the main thing is the repos are created, they install, they work, their tests pass. As of about 5 minutes ago, every repo is running tests on Travis. The one exception was the Qt console because it needs. It was non-trivial to get Qt going, so I just didn't do it and made sure the test passed on my machine. But a Sprinter at PyCon got the test running with Qt this morning.
And what can you describe a little more about how IPtest either exists or doesn't exist, and how our current tests are being run?
So IPtest is still used to test IPython.
Gotcha.
It is still used to test IPython parallel. And the JavaScript test runners that were part of IPtest are removed from IPython and are run. So that code is mostly unmodified. What in IPtest were called JavaScript test controllers.
Okay.
That code is mostly unmodified, minus all the IPtest wrapper stuff. In the notebook repo, and they're run they don't install a command line entry point. They're just run with python-m Jupyter notebook.js test.
Okay. So, and are we, for our Python tests outside of IPython, are we using Nose or PyTest?
Yeah, no, I didn't. Since all our tests are already written with Nose, I guess most of them would have run with PyTest.
Okay.
That's true most of the time. That most Nose tests will run with PyTest. So we could adopt PyTest and slowly migrate individual tests, but I didn't rewrite any tests or anything. I just got them, other than where a few paths changed.
Okay.
I didn't change any of the and mostly IPtest is just IPtest is a relatively thin wrapper around Nose tests that does create a temporary environment, set a couple environment variables, instantiate a global IPython instance,
right,
which is not used by anything other than IPython and IPython parallel.
Okay.
And then also some shorthand for dispatching the test groups. But that's also not used anymore because all those test groups are
gone. Okay,
well,
and I'm assuming all of the dependency checking and filtering that IPtest used to do is gone?
Most of it, yeah.
Okay.
The logic is still all there. I removed the checks that no longer apply to code still in IPython.
Gotcha.
Like it doesn't check for ZMQ, it doesn't check for Qt, all that stuff. But for the most part, the bulk of what used to be IPtest was instantiate a global IPython and then run Nose. That still applies to all the IPython tests.
Yeah. Okay. Part of what I'm trying to understand is that, or it sounds like a lot of our tests have become much simpler because it's just Nose.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Okay. I mean, whether we migrate to PyTest eventually is sort of another question, but we're already. I feel like there's been a reduction in technical debt across repos in the testing area.
Yes. Yeah. And there's some utility that we had in. So the one thing that required some duplication, and we may need to look out for because it may not be happening everywhere is the test environment, right? We make sure to run IPython in a temporary directory with a temporary IPython directory. And I updated at least some of the tests to make sure that the same thing happens, but with Jupyter there's actually more directories to manage than IPython. And so there might be a few tests that are running that will pick up user config or pick up user kernels or something that we may need to watch out for.
Okay.
But yeah, that's one of the pieces that IPTest did that Nose in general doesn't, that we probably want everywhere. But there's a much simpler way to do it in Nose. Right? You can just do a module level setup function.
Right.
And it's maybe even, arguably even easier in PyTest. But
okay.
Similar. I don't know if people care about kind of how the big split happened.
I think some detail would be nice. So yeah, it's in more brains than just yours.
Yeah. So did I not link? Okay. So I've posted the tools and things I use to do all of this. So there is since we wanted phase one, and I've gone into a bit more detail in the draft blog post if we want to actually put a blog post up somewhere. Phase one was, splitting out all the sub-packages within the IPython repo. Yep. And we kept, and then we put the shims in so the old imports still worked, just with a warning. And then we didn't modify any of the code in what we pulled out, other than we found a few dependencies that we didn't want to keep. And then we, some duplicate functionality, some using standard library stuff because, the utility functions are obsolete or something like that. And then once all of the projects were in their own subpack, and this kept the tests running on Travis and everything, as long as you did an editable install. So if you did setup.pydevelop or pip install-e, because what that does is puts the repo on sys.path, which means that any directory next to IPython in the repo would be importable. Which is that's how we kept it running without adding extra shenanigans. And that's how we made sure that we weren't breaking things horribly with the shims and stuff. And then the actual split was cloning the IPython repo, and then running what I called clone whitelist, which runs git filter branch. So you give it a list of files and or directories, and then it uses git log follow to find the history of file names that those files have had. And so git filter branch, you can the more common thing for git filter branch is to remove specific files or directories, but we want to keep specific files or directories instead, which is a lot more complicated. So what I did was I wrote a simple script for just collecting the history of file names given a list of current file names, and then a git index filter to run with filter branch to remove everything not in that collection, which takes a very long time to run. Well, not crazy long, like between 30 and 45 minutes. And then that gives us the new repos with the code and their history, but none of the history of the other files. Wow. Which means that the IPython parallel repo is like 3 megs. The only one that's more than 10 is the notebook repo. And I did some extra cleaning on the notebook one with BFG. So BFG is a Git repo cleaner that is for like removing targeted files, and it's a lot more efficient. Like it runs in 10 seconds instead of half an hour. And I did, with that, I did two basic things. Was I cut off the history of the notebook stuff at the move out of front end, which happened before 1.0, I think.
Okay.
Which means that there's no history of JavaScript files that we committed when we were committing dependencies to the repo. None of that is preserved in the notebook repo. And the other thing was, since actually as of right now, the CSS, the compile targets of less, are not in the repo at all. I threw away all that. When I did the split, the CSS files were still needed, so I threw away the history of those files, the compiled CSS, because they're not interesting to anybody, and so those files actually got, the only commit that happened in those files in the new repo was removing them with the PR that switches to using JavaScript, using Node to build things. But that's the gist of how that. Oh, and so for each project, I did them in dependency order. So like I did genutils first, which didn't affect the IPython repo because nothing uses genutils. And got tests running, posted that, and then did traitlets next. So split the repo, scrub the history, and then update the imports to use genutils instead of the shims. And then once traitlets on its own test pass, then I update IPython to remove traitlets and depend on traitlets. Gotcha. And then I just iterate like that, basically in dependency order. And then up until the notebook, the IPython repo was still running all of the tests. So it was using the shims to actually test and reconvert kernel, notebook, and everything. So the IPython repo was installing all of the upstream packages and then running, everything down to the notebook JavaScript tests until I removed notebook itself, and then I just removed all the non-IPython tests. I think that's the gist. The disadvantage of doing this, obviously, is that if you have to do anything coordinated, it's now a pain because they're fundamentally uncoordinated units. While things are on master, since with pip you can't express dependencies on things from Git. The only way to get all the dependencies in one command is to use a requirements file. Technically, there's a dependency links functionality that used to do this, but pip removed it. It was a reasonable thing to do, but it was something that would have let us keep working from master. So I think it'll be, so it's a pain to use master right now because you have to either install from a requirements file or, since I'm working on everything, manually clone 11 repos and install them. So I have a project piphub, which is just all it is shorthand for pip install-e from GitHub. So that might be a useful thing for some of this stuff. And I posted a requirements file that has everything in it.
Gotcha.
That people can just use. I did find a bug that shows up in the IPython parallel tests that people had actually reported earlier in IPython that was a result of a change in master to use memory views. We were using, when doing zero copy stuff from 0MQ, we were getting buffer objects on Python 2 and memory views on Python 3. And when Jason was doing the binary stuff with buffers for the widget things, it made more sense for it to be, since we require Python 2.7 now, it made more sense to be consistent and just use memory views everywhere. That resulted in a couple API changes that didn't show up except in IPython parallel onto Python 2. And so once I got the parallel tests running, I found that bug, which was actually had problems in the IPython kernel code, IPython parallel, and actually a function in genutils. that Jason had added for it. I probably should have taken this opportunity to not to use one less thing from GenuTils. That maybe would have been the right thing to do. But I fixed it in GenuTils, fixed it in kernel, and fixed it in parallel, which was actually several PRs because, of course, I can't run the IPython parallel test with an unmerged PR of IPython kernel, with an unmerged PR. So that was the when we have problems like that, then it's going to be a pain, a real big one. Hopefully, and part of the premise of all this is that we're not going to have many of those.
And I think we should take very careful note when we do have those.
Yeah.
Because it's probably a sign that there's coupling that we shouldn't have.
Yeah, so a few of the warty bits. Oh, I guess one, in terms of the file whitelists that I kept that is relevant, I basically just kept code. I did not keep any setup code, and I did not keep any, and I kept some of the Sphinx docs that was relevant. I did not keep any Sphinx building tools, any of our docs building tools, and I did not keep any of our installation tools, because I think, except for in the notebook, because most of those things had grown lots of kind of crufty functionality that was specific to one piece or another, and I figured we could do a better job starting from scratch with most of those. And PyCon sprinters have already started doing that with the Sphinx docs, just starting with Sphinx Quick Start and starting fresh with that stuff. And I guess that's. What's the other thing I was going to mention?
So one I spent over the weekend a few minutes looking at some of the repos, and I saw, what is it? Oh, I think it's IPython kernel has shims everywhere.
IPython kernel. What do you mean?
Hold on, let me go.
IPython.kernel, you mean? In the IPython repo?
Yes.
In the IPython prime repo?
Yes, IPython prime master.
Yes.
I was expecting the shims to be a single file per thing, but the kernel has basically every individual file within kernel is a shim.
Yeah, that's because of some of the way, since kernel is the trickiest of all the splits, because it was split into two repos. So IPython.kernel contained what is now Jupyter client, so kernel manager, kernel client, and session. That's the generic implementation of the message spec that does not depend on anything IPython.
Yes. Okay. So it's
and then there's the IPython kernel repo, which is the kernel side part of that, and so the shims are more complex, because So I started doing it with a fancy shim, but it needed to be a multi-shim that would shim, it would fall back, check if this upstream module. But when you've got, the main reason for the shim module is that it lets you shim. This is a bit confusing terminology, but the main reason for the shim module object that we use is it lets you shim packages. There's no reason to. You don't need to do that when you're shimming modules, because you can just do from upstream import star. That's a shim module. So there are some explicitly shimmed modules in kernel, and that's not needed in any of the others. And it's because the kernel was split, rather than just being a rename, basically.
Okay. So I'm
a little confused. Uh,
Yeah.
what's the difference between IPython and IPython_kernel?
So IPython is what IPython has always been, which is just a better shell for Python.
Mm-hmm.
IPython kernel is another package that provides the implementation of the Jupyter protocol
Mm-hmm.
For Python.
for Python. So it includes the IPython kernel spec. It includes the what we call the kernel app. It includes all the 0MQ stuff.
Got it.
And it's a separate package because it's got totally different dependencies. Right? IPython kernel depends on Jupyter client. It depends on it depends.
Got it.
Let's see. It depends
Okay,
on
I
0MQ.
understand now. Yeah, I got it.
No, we absolutely could have done the IPython, left the kernel side stuff in the IPython repo and kept the extras require optional dependency stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We could have done that. But that's not what we decided to do when we talked about it at the dev meeting. So
The only issue, I mean, I understand why the kernel is shimmed in that way now. The only issue I see, though, is that if we start to do work on the IPython kernel module, or so IPython kernel,
yeah,
we could break the shims very easily by just renaming a file or.
yeah, that's true in all of them though. The kernel one's not. That's true of every one. Yeah.
Well, but isn't there? I mean, in the kernel subpackage in IPython, there's actually files with particular names there.
No, remember, yeah, but it's not. It doesn't behave differently, right? So all shim module, the shim stuff we're using everywhere else, is just making it behave as if there were the file layout under IPython HTML is exactly the file layout under Jupyter Notebook, and in every module there's a from my same name import star. Like the behavior's not different.
Well, hold on. Let me just. I want to understand. So if I go into parallel.py,
Yeah.
in IPython,
Yeah.
it basically creates a shim between IPython.parallel and the new IPython_parallel module.
Yes. And that means if we rename, so if we rename parallel.client to parallel.broken client.
Yeah. No, I understand that. That will.
Yeah.
But if we rename things inside IPython parallel, we don't ever have to change the shim.
Well, right.
But in the kernel area, if I go into the kernel subdirectory, subpackage, and I look at like client ABC, it actually has from Jupyter_client.client ABC import star.
Yeah, but that's not any more broken.
But my point is, if we change things within Jupyter client, or
the breakage is identical in those two cases.
Well,
because if someone
types, have to update the shim though.
No, it doesn't. Not any more than updating the shim in IPython parallel does. Right? Because if I move in IPython parallel, if I move IPython parallel.client to IPython parallel.broken, then if you do from IPython.parallel import client, that will fail with an import error. Because what IPython from IPython.parallel import client does is map to from IPython_parallel import client.
Okay, so it will fail
in the same way.
In the same way.
So what that means is for the shims, if we do those renames in the upstream package,
yep.
in the real package, we need to if we're going to do something like that and we don't want it to break, we need we need similar shims. They don't need to be magic shims like we do in IPython because they won't be these nested things. But we would need to have a deprecation. This has moved, so that and in again, just like in IPython kernel with the from foo import star, and in IPython parallel with the magic shim, in both cases, just moving something upstream will break it, and in both cases, putting leaving something in that place that does an upstream import would fix it.
Okay.
So we shouldn't need to modify any of the shims.
Okay. So, other question. So, am I to understand that the only shimmed thing in IPython that's a directory is kernel? All the other stuff just became a single file.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So that's good. Um, Config. So the other thing that's confusing is why, and I'm sure there's a reason. Is
Maybe not.
why. So I'm just looking at the top level modules in IPython.
Uh,
It's all shims except for display, which we've always had as a top level module,
yeah.
and then paths.py. And my curiosity is, why is paths.py not in utils?
So, yeah, I'm not actually. So that happened. So utils.path was one of the things in genutils.
Yes, no, absolutely.
And we didn't want the IPython specific stuff in there because.
Yes.
So that's why was based on the assumption that utils.path would leave the IPython repo, and the file that was going to leave shouldn't have anything IPython in it.
Yes. Okay.
However, what we actually did, and we still actually can change our minds on this. What we actually did was IPython doesn't use genutils
because it has copies in utils.
Because what we did was we copied things to genutils, and then we're going to kill genutils. And so the reasoning behind that was we're going to kill genutils as soon as we can.
Yeah.
And IPython's probably not going to stop needing the stuff in genutils, so it would mean moving stuff out of IPython and then slowly moving the stuff that IPython actually uses back in, which didn't make a lot of sense. But we actually came to that realization after Thomas kind of cleaned up utils.path to not have anything IPython in it. So it's actually, it's not necessarily clear that having IPython.paths is what we should do. It does actually match what Jupyter Core does. So it's a public API. So one thing is, I don't really think anything in utils should be considered a public IPython API.
I don't. Yeah, that's
not a give. Like, that's not just a statement of fact. That's
no,
how I feel right now. Which
no, and I'm just running through the logic in my head, and I think I mostly agree with you, but I'm not completely sure.
Yeah, well, it also depends on, and because right now there's absolutely a mixture of super private things we dump in there and things that people should actually use.
Yeah.
And I think part of the nice thing about IPython.paths is it's a top level, it's a single module that people can import that says, I want to find some IPython stuff. I have Python functions for finding IPython stuff, and the Jupyter Jupyter Core repo behaves the same way. That it's just functions for getting Jupyter locations. So you import, give me the Jupyter config directory, the Jupyter runtime directory. We definitely could just put given that we're not removing the generic part of paths, we could definitely just put it back.
Yeah, and I think the thing I'm trying to think about is to make sure that we're not incurring new technical debt in the sense of 6 months from now, most of the world is not going to know that the unsplit repo ever existed. And I want to make sure that we're, like, normally I would say, well, let's put all the utils in the utils sub package. And people aren't going to know, well, there's this complex story of genutils and this and that, and some of it's public and some of it wasn't. I think I'm...
Yeah, no, so the argument for keeping paths is that things like get IPython dir shouldn't have been in utils in the first place. That it's a public API that should be highly visible and not in the dumping ground that is IPython.utils, which IPython.utils is going to remain, right? We've got lots of shims and wrappers and stuff we use for tests. Like, very little of IPython.utils is code that is code that should be imported outside the IPython repo.
Yeah.
And so I think now we could just say, yeah, that's how it works. Some of these are public, some of these aren't, and we can manage that with documentation. Like, we don't document the things that people shouldn't use. Or we could, over time, take the things that people should use, people that we should say, right, because I would say that for the most part, things in utils are APIs that we can safely just remove. And that's not true right now, right? There are things where the only way to do it is to import something from utils.
Yeah.
There are official, reasonable things to do where the only way to do it is in utils.
Yeah.
And I think having a package level distinction for this package is full of nothing but private APIs is valuable. But we don't have to do it that way. Like, I think paths is the only thing we've done this with. So if you think we shouldn't do that, we can just put the IPython paths things back and be done with it.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it might be. I mean, there are abstractions that we can use to declare what things are public and private in a subpackage. In the sense, we could import things in the init file and tell people that's the public API. Don't ever import things from deep in the bowels of utils, like, and expect it to keep working.
Sure.
I think I do like that idea because it gives us free flexibility to reorganize utils while maintaining a thin layer of public API. Whereas if people have a start to use paths as a public API at the single file module, it becomes difficult to move that around or refactor it later.
Well, I mean, it's just like display, right? Display is an API module. IPython.display.
Yeah, exactly. You end up doing stuff like that.
Yeah, which I don't think is a problem.
Yeah.
I think separating implementation from API is generally a good thing. Yeah. I mean, it's what I do in 0MQ. That there are two entire implementations or 2.5 entire implementations of 0MQ, but if you look at the docs, it all looks like there's a zmq.socket object, and there's no such thing. Like, there's zmq.backend.cython.socket, but what you actually import is zmq.sugar.socket or something.
Yeah. See, I don't think I would call it just paths.
Okay.
Maybe because it's IPython paths. It's
IPython.paths. Yeah.
Something like that, and I think I like the idea of putting it in utils, but exposing it in the init file, because I think we're going to run into other things in utils that are public.
Yeah, definitely.
We might as well have a consistent way of exposing all of that. Yeah, it makes me long for ideas of public, private, protected, and modules, and But
Yeah.
oh well, we live in Python land with this, so that's not a reality.
Okay, so you'd rather just revert the paths change?
Yeah, and have start to put. Hold on, let me just see what we have in the init file of utils right now.
Nothing, I think.
Ah, yeah, it's empty. So start.
Yeah, I mean, because utils is specifically, there's no API there.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to hear what other people think. I don't feel super strongly about this. That's my intuition.
My gut feeling when we first started talking about it was that it is just an extra repository, like kind of repository happy. We're splitting so many things. And one of the things I'm going to do today is go to the whiteboard and just try to diagram all these repositories out because I feel like
the point, this is not a repository. This is the IPython.util subpackage, not a repository.
Oh, I thought IPython.paths right now is a separate repository.
No, it's just a file in IPython.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
It just got moved out of the utils folder.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can ping Thomas who did that, but I think the main reasoning behind it was, it's kind of a what is utils.
I like the idea of having a utils subpackage for projects that have more than one utils file.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Like I like that I think is a good idea that keeps the top level noise down and allows us to expose that public API. So now let's ping Thomas on it and see sort of what.
Yeah. So the still to do stuff. Docs. Some people are getting Sphinx back up and running. I would like to try just using read the docs and not doing GH pages or anything.
Oh, absolutely. Like for the Sphinx docs that survive, yes. That.
And also strictly whitelist the API docs.
Yes.
So get rid of API gen.
Yes.
And strictly whitelist public API stuff.
I'm 100% on that.
The next bit is issue migration that we haven't done. I have implemented issue migration, but I figured we should talk about what we actually want to happen before I run it.
Yeah. What?
So what I have, and you can look at. There's a link, kind of low down where it says link to comment test B.
Yep.
That is the result of. That's actually not a good example. Let's actually look at number 8. Why doesn't it link to number 8? It should be, go to issue 8. Yeah, new link, better. So what the script I have does is it takes an issue, goes through the comments, creates a new issue on the target repo, and then adds a line at the top. Could add it to the bottom too. Adds a line at the top, linking to attributing it to the user, right? So these comments are all going to come from the user that runs the script. You can't make new comments that are actually authored by someone other than you. That would be a problem.
This will totally annihilate your contribution heat map. We'll have one square with like 1,000 million.
So the disadvantage of this is, at least as it is right now, is since it attributes the author with a proper @ mention, this will result in a bazillion emails. I could link to the author just with an HTML link, in which case the author would not get an email, and they would also not get subscribed to the new issue. So okay, maybe I'll go back to the high level view before going to the details. So So it takes the issue, does something to add to the issue body to link back to the original, creates a new issue on the new repo, and then does the same for every comment, and migrates milestone, and migrates labels, and migrates assignee, and closes the original issue with a link to the new one. So that's, yeah, I mean, that's the gist of it.
So run through the, again, there's a lot going on there. So
it copies, at the highest level, it copies the issue,
yep, including
labels, milestone, and assignee, if defined.
Okay, so it actually comments the full issue and all of the comments in that issue.
Yeah, all the issue and all the comments become individual comments.
Okay. By what user?
The comments are by the user that runs the script.
Okay, so okay, gotcha. I'm following.
Yeah.
Does it migrate all issues or just open issues?
It migrates one issue.
So you specifically say which issue to
migrate IPython number 425 to IPython parallel.
Okay.
So it runs one at a time, and then the next step is to wrap it and say, for every open issue labeled notebook, migrate it to the notebook issue. That would be the loop that would be the outer level that just produces the numbers that the migrate should run.
Perfect. Okay.
Right now, I would assume we'd only run it on open issues.
So it really copies an entire issue and its discussion.
Yes.
How are links to other issues and pull requests handled? I'm assuming they just point to the original.
Unless I'm parsing, they are going to just break. As it is right now, they'll just break.
Well, yeah.
Unless I want to parse the markdown and make sure that I take every number 423 and make it IPython 423. I could probably write something that will get it right most of the time. I definitely couldn't write something in a reasonable amount of time that would get it right in a rigorous way.
So this means migrated issues that link to other migrated issues. The links will still point at the original versions of the issues, not the migrated issues.
They will link to non-existent issues on the new repo. The links will just not work.
Or worse, point to the wrong issue on the new repo.
Yeah. So over time, they will point to the wrong issue. Initially, because we won't have 8,000 issues on the new repo, they will point to nothingness.
And hold on, how many issues do we have open right now? Oh shit!
So I can. The tricky thing.
It's like 855.
That's not it. I mean, and how many of those are going to migrate? Half, maybe.
I don't know.
Probably or less. I mean, a lot of those are actually IPython issues. So.
Oh, that's true. So yeah.
I mean, I can do a substitution that's like, hash number as a whole word, so preceded by new line or white space, and succeeded by new line or white space, or I guess punctuation. It would probably do well, and then I'd have to update the link. Because that's the problem, is like, unless I'm updating the links is going to be hard, because I would have to collect all my issues, because we link forward and back.
No, it's not a acyclic graph.
Yeah. So
probably like just having it point back to the original issue. As long as you can do that.
Yeah, that's probably the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I can do that. At least it'll work on. I can do something that will work most of the time. I'm sure I'll miss some cases, like this. You could have it be, the text of a markdown link, which would be weird since GitHub already does that. But there are probably lots of cases, and I don't want to catch a hash on a URL.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the good, if we do that, if someone clicks on a link, it will take them back to the original issue, but at the bottom of the original issue, it will point to the new migrated issue.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to do that I don't think you can do with the GitHub API is I want to lock the original issue so that you can't comment on it.
Yes, absolutely.
But I don't think the GitHub API exposes the lock because that's a new thing.
That's fine. We can all sit and lock issues one afternoon.
I'll see if I can. Maybe the API actually lets you do it. That's just not documented yet. But okay, so I'll try to get and I can easily make some tests for that. I'll try to get it to migrate to update the references.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Because also after later we can just run this because inevitably we're going to have lots of reported issues on IPython that don't belong there. You can just run this script once and say, "Oh, we've moved this issue over there." So we don't have to say, "Oh, can you please close this and open a new issue?"
I know.
We can just run this and say, "This issue has now moved."
That's true.
It's not as nice as if GitHub supported issue migration officially, where it could just redirect, which would be awesome.
Oh
but,
gosh, that would be incredible.
But in the absence of that, things for me to do, and I guess one thing. What do you guys think about the attribution? And what should we add to the individual comments and things on the new home, keeping in mind that mentioning a person sends them an email?
Go ahead, Jess.
My, at least gut reaction to that is that as long as the migration happens relatively quickly, it's probably good to @mention people because otherwise they're not going to know the issue's changed and then they'll miss new emails about it. And
so there's one piece of that, and that's that they will get an email on the original issue saying that the issue has moved.
Oh, true.
So they'll get one email for every issue that they're subscribed to, and so they'll get one email saying this issue has moved, and then they'll have the choice to say, do I still care about this? I can click the link and resubscribe. If we don't mention them at all, I'm sure some people will. I don't know. I'm sure some people will not be happy either way, but.
So I definitely don't think they should get two separate emails, one for the migration and one for pinging on the new.
Well, the one for the migration is unavoidable, and it's not. And remember, it's not two emails. At least the way the script works currently, it's n+1 emails, where n is the number of comments you've made.
Huh? Oh.
Right, because every comment is attributed. So if you've made 10 comments, there will be 10 comments made by me that say, you originally said this over here. And that will...
this is not... So you're thinking of pinging on the comment level, not the issue level.
Well, that's what it does right now, is when it attributes, this comment is actually a migrated comment, it says... at the top, this person made this comment, which would mean that it's one email per comment, which I think is probably not great.
So basically, you're going to replay everyone's email for the last few years.
Yes. For unfixed bugs.
I don't think we can do that. I think.
So then the question is, what should we do on the new repo?
So I would do attribution on a per comment basis, but not with at.
Okay, so just
So
do username commented and then do the HTML link to the original comment.
Yep. I would not at mention them. I would say they should be, so that then the two questions are, should they be at mentioned on the issue as a whole so they get subscribed to it? Just once though, not in every comment. And
Okay.
should,
But wouldn't you get, once you've been at mentioned, don't you get emails on subsequent comments?
Yes.
yeah, you do regardless of your, yeah. So
But
maybe
you could at mention at the bottom of the issue.
So
Hmm.
if the comments are unmodified, any at mentions in the original issues and comments are going to still ping people. Unless I'm modifying the comments to undo any at mentions.
yes, you're absolutely right. Oh my gosh.
I mean, I can try to find an issue that mentions all of us and has a relatively long conversation and see what happens.
Yeah, I think we probably are going to need to start to test it on a one-by-one basis, even if we create a new IPython issue.
I mean, I can do it. I've got 2 repos that I've been migrating issues between. I can make an issue on that. The only thing is I need since the attribution is comments, I need other people to make comments.
Yeah, let's do that. Why don't you open an issue on IPython? At mention. Well, a lot of us are subscribed. I'm not. So at least at mention Fernando and I, and then we can come and post comments, and then we'll try a migration, and we'll just keep trying that until we come up with a workflow that doesn't completely flood our inbox, but is still useful.
Sure. Okay.
that's a really. We should, at least in the back of our heads, keep track of the pain points here and talk to the GitHub folks at some point.
Yeah, and I don't, because this is going to be it's going to be a flood of emails, but it's going to be a flood of emails that happens over like one day, and then it's going to stop.
Yeah, some amount of it I think is unavoidable, and that's fine. I think we don't
need it to be perfect. We just need it to be not ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. We
Okay, so just for a starting point, do you think we should or shouldn't CC people? Ah, man, I guess people are gonna. We don't. Okay, so sorry, thinking. So I'll at least to start out, I'll leave at mentions in the comments, in the original comments unmodified.
Yeah, so at mentions that are already there will continue to be there.
So there will still be, like anyone, like ping Min for review or whatever, ping Brian for design review. That still means you're going to get an email for every comment.
That you're at mentioned in, yes.
No, you're going to get an email for every comment in an issue after you're at mentioned one time.
Ah, yeah. Oh, okay. Wow.
That's going to be right. That's a lot.
Yeah.
It also means that anyone subscribed to the repo is going to get an email for every comment. Just their new comments. I wish I could turn off email notifications on the repo, on the new repo.
Yeah, to control that.
But I could say this rather than have people unsubscribe. I wish I could say this repo will never email anybody for today. Maybe I'll ping GitHub about that. Because that would be the easiest thing, right?
Yeah.
That it still establishes all the subscriptions by pings. It just doesn't send emails.
Yeah, if you could do that, that would be nice.
Right, because that would be the cleanest thing would be if just these API created comments, if those didn't send emails, then leaving everything as it is would be fine. Not even fine. It would be good.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I assume that's not possible, but maybe I'll I'll confirm that that's not possible, and then okay. So yeah, I'll open an issue on IPython, and then we can all make comments, and maybe I'll add links to repos, links to other issues.
Yeah.
So I can test.
So one other thing about documentation. So obviously we have to have a longer conversation about documentation, but I would say let's not create Sphinx docs for every repo we have without first, because and I think part of the big question we have to think about is which repos have notebook docs, which repos have Sphinx docs, and I don't want people to go to a bunch of work and create Sphinx docs for every repo we have and then have us decide, oh, well, some percentage of them are notebook-only docs.
Are any of them going to be notebook-only docs? Because they're going to have, like, basic API docs.
Well, it's not, honestly, it's not clear to me. I mean, when we talk...
IPython Parallel would have API docs, Notebook would have API docs, Qt console, kernel, client.
I think when we last talked about it, this is 2 dev meetings ago,
yeah.
Our idea was basically to almost entirely migrate away from Sphinx. And API docs were the one thing that we were going to try to keep handling with Sphinx for now, but then start to develop tools that would actually migrate that into notebooks. And so it's just not it's just not clear to me, and I don't want people to go to a ton of work before we actually have the time to sit down and figure out what we're going to do with that.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just getting Sphinx up and running is not a lot of work, but I would think that we're gonna want Sphinx API docs on every repo.
Yeah. No, and that yeah.
And that shouldn't be, but basically that's just about it, right?
Yes, and I think I'm more thinking of people starting to split and migrate the IPython Sphinx narrative docs into narrative docs for each repo, which I think...
Yeah, and, I mean, I took a couple of the kind of obvious ones along, just because those files aren't big. There's no great cost to... I didn't feel the need to be super careful with migrating the docs in the split for 2 reasons. One is those files aren't big, so copying them over and then deleting them is not a big deal. And the other is their history is not interesting, so failing to copy them and then deciding we want them without their history is also not a big deal.
Okay. Yep. That sounds very good.
I think the only thing left, is the Jupyter paths and environment variables. So the Jupyter applications and things, Jupyter Notebook and so forth, are Jupyter applications, not IPython applications, which means they don't use the .ipython directory.
They use .jupyter.
They use .jupyter, and they use a separate runtime and data directory that are not in the config directory. When we talked about setting this up, we only mentioned an environment variable for setting the config directory, but not an environment variable for setting the runtime or data directories. And when mocking out the environment for tests, that's kind of annoying.
Yeah, I think if we have actual separate directories for those, then we should have the environment variable.
Okay, I'll make sure those get added to the core repo.
Yeah. So is there a top-level Jupyter app that has that base logic?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah, and most of the logic is in Jupyter core.paths, and then the application loads those and ensures the ones that are used exist and stuff like that.
Okay, and then are we? How did the refactoring of traitlets and config and base applications on that side of things go?
So IPython.config so IPython.util, so the traitlets file went to so we created a traitlets package.
Yep.
And the traitlets module is in traitlets. So you just do, instead of from IPython.utils.traitlets import, you do from traitlets import. And then IPython.config went to traitlets.config.
Okay. And then did the base IPython application went to IPython?
Yeah, the base IPython application was already in core, so that nothing changed there.
Okay. Oh, okay.
The base application in config was already generic.
Okay.
So that just moved, and IPython just imports it now. And Jupyter has a sibling to base, so there's base IPython application, and Jupyter has a sibling to that that's just called Jupyter app.
Okay.
And that it's basically nothing other than the directory layout implementation, and then like generating config files, and that's basically all it is.
Yeah, I think we probably want another base class in traitlets.
For what?
That basically adds a simple version of config file and directory handling, so that someone could say, hey, I want to write a new command line application, and it's going to be .foo is my directory, and I want it to know how to load config files. And
I think we could reasonably, we could do that as a new class, or we could just add that. We could just add that kind of functionality to the base application, because since all exist, the downstream apps are IPython and Jupyter at this point. I think that would be. We'd want to make sure that it works without creating any directories, but that's part of the extensible logic.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think adding like self.config directory and loading config files to the base application, to the traitlets application, is a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah,
it's trivial logic, so it doesn't. There's no real cost to implementing it in the descendant classes, but yeah, we can do that.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. It'll make the Jupyter app very, very simple.
It already is, but yeah, even simpler, yeah.
So let's see here. I think let's see. So I think there's more packaging packaging extension conversations to have.
Oh yeah, that reminds. So the real big thing left to do is we still need to create the IPython widgets repo out of the Jupyter Notebook repo, and we need to figuring out how to install it is the big, detangling that is still something that we haven't figured out how we're going to do. So we need to talk about that so we can get that done soon.
Is the packaging discussion going to be separate to that? Like, should I just MVP something where the Python and the JavaScript gets installed in 2 different steps?
I honestly don't know. Or that widgets runs as like a notebook, that's like a server extension that registers the. I don't know. So the way to make it work with the least amount of changes from how they work right now would be to make the widgets provide a notebook server extension that registers handlers for the new JavaScript. I honestly don't know how the widgets should make their JavaScript available. I genuinely just don't.
But I think, I mean, I know the packaging stuff is really hard, but I think we have to get back to thinking about it. And
yeah, well, if we have to do something to get in order to be able to split the widgets.
But I'm not excited about doing yet another hack.
Yeah, sure.
That accumulates more technical debt in that area. I mean, we may have to do that, but I would love to actually have a solution for this stuff that starts to reduce the complexity and the debt that we have.
One question. In my mind, I've been thinking of the widget repo as an IPython repo. Because I mean, this is a minor detail, really, but basically, eventually there will be a Jupyter widgets repo, and that will be a JavaScript only repo.
Yeah.
At this point, the JavaScript side is tightly coupled to the Python side, and so they're going to be one repo. And because of that, I was thinking of it starting on IPython, and then once it's stabilized, we pull the JavaScript out to a new repo. The other thing to do is to create it as a Jupyter repo, and then someday pull out the IPython. My guess is that with the installation process, it's probably going to make more sense to go IPython to Jupyter than Jupyter to IPython.
Yeah, I think the main question is, where will users import it from? Like, will they be importing Jupyter_widgets or IPython?
Well, definitely not,
widgets?
right? The widgets are definitely IPython, right? The Python
absolutely.
package, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But the JavaScript is not.
Yeah, I think.
Well, that definitely argues for IPython as the starting place.
So the only, hold on, let me just see, Julia. What's the name of the Julia package?
Like React or something?
Oh, Interact.
Interact, right? No, Interact, I think, is on top of Reactive. I think Reactive? I forget which app. Maybe Reactive is just the traitlet stuff.
No, it looks like Interact is right. Interact.jl.
Okay, and then Interact depends on Reactive, which is traitlet-C. But Interact is the JavaScript part. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a little hesitant. So here's a question: which of our repos have user-focused, like where users will be importing from them often?
Importing Python?
Yes.
They're all on IPython.
Okay. I think.
It depends a little bit on what kind of users you mean, because the kernel client stuff is.
No, I'm talking about scientists and engineers and data scientists type users, not dev-ish type users. And the thing I'm wondering is, if we want to have, I mean, it's a question of what we name the IPython widget repo. Is it IPython_widgets, which seems really annoying as a user? Actually, so does IPython_parallel.
Okay, well then maybe we shouldn't have decided on that.
Yeah, I think
that's true. I mean, that's what we do with everything.
Yeah, no, and the part that I hadn't appreciated is that, like, I don't mind if us internally writing code have those type of import names.
Then what should they be called?
Parallel and widgets.
Yeah, that's not okay.
No, it's not.
Widgets.
I don't know. Let's. I really don't know. Yeah. Oops, did I?
Yeah, no, I don't know. That's what we've done.
Yeah, yeah, that's a tough.
We're still at a point that we can rename all these repos if we want, but yeah, we can't exactly use notebook and all those things. We could reasonably probably use nbconvert, but that's probably the only sufficiently non-generic name of any of the new packages that we could use, other than just coming up with a new name.
Yeah. That's a really hard. Yeah, I don't know, and we can keep using
and that's
these
why we
things
did
for
what we
now.
did. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know it's a horrible problem.
Yeah, and a few extra characters I think just really doesn't matter.
So in Python you can't namespace your entire package? Like
You can. So Python 3 has sensible namespace packages, but we would require, basically depending on Python 3.4 or later. Python earlier than that has namespace packages, but nobody should ever use them. Plus, namespace packages are super confusing because you don't realize
what you're importing.
Yeah, you don't realize that IPython.parallel is actually something you don't have when you have IPython. So I'm not sure that namespace packages should ever be used, because IPython.parallel is really not better than IPython_parallel, but the namespace packages aren't better than namespace in a string versus namespace with a dot, but it doesn't solve the problem. But
well, they're a little better if you have like some kind of reflection, right? If you have some kind of way to automatically traverse the namespace, you do IPython dot, and then you see what you have imported. Like then you know, like, oh, I'm always going to look under IPython, or always look under Jupyter.
Yeah, or Jupyter tab gives you the same thing. So
well, I guess that's true.
Yeah. All right. I think that's. Oh yeah, and so we don't have any migration yet, which we need. So that's kind of the next thing I'm planning to work on is migrating the IPython, taking the kernel's directory and copying it to the new home folder. The way it works right now, I think the way it works right now is it's actually because the migration hasn't happened yet. The IPython locations are explicitly added to the path so that they still work for now. But once I get migration going, then I'll remove that. I think that's everything.
Great work.
It was a lot.
Yeah. This comment about Jupyter Logger under my name or under Jupyter.org?
Oh,
What's Jupyter Logger?
That's me. So I made all the. Do you guys remember Jupyter Logger, right? That's the little program that I wrote that logs user actions in the Jupyter notebook.
Oh, okay.
I made all the changes that we talked about at the dev meeting, and I also converted it to TypeScript. I was
cool.
If it would be better for me to open it under my name, or if I should create yet another repository under the Jupyter.org to host that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's likely that others of us are going to touch it at some point. So I think it's fine to put it under Jupyter.
Okay. I'm going to add huboff to it.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
So you can run it.
Yeah, and then I'll talk to Brian before we start deploying it.
Conference things. I have. There's PyData in July, SciPy in July, and then Strata New York City. Basically, I'm not planning on giving a talk at those conferences, but I've contacted the organizers of each of them to see if we could get a booth to just set up and do demos. I think that the exposure we end up getting with booths is in many cases greater than any talk we could give. Who else is planning on going to PyData Seattle?
That's probably too close to moving for me.
Okay.
It's back to back with SciPy, right?
Like 2 weeks later. Well,
Yeah,
it's
like
like just
two and a
after
half
the
weeks
4th.
later. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the 24th through the 26th.
Ooh, I would probably be interested in going,
Okay.
but I don't have a talk planned.
That's fine. I mean, they're still taking submissions. You're welcome to give a talk, or if you just want to try to do a booth, that's fine too. I'm sure that they will eventually come asking for tutorials or something.
Mhm.
SciPy. So looks like Matthias, Thomas, and John have submitted a tutorial, and then Jess, and Kyle, you submitted one about comp models. Great. Okay. And then the last comment by Matthias, do we want to use JS build tool that are JS aware?
We don't have Matthias, but I think John might have something to say about it. Things like Gulp Watch and stuff.
Gulp.
Oh yeah, I love Gulp.
Yeah,
Okay.
for our dev JavaScript workflow, like I'm more than on board in using something like Gulp.
But admittedly, I have no experience with Grunt.
I don't think we want to use Grunt.
Yeah, I've heard not so good things about it. That's
What I've seen.
I don't think we have a need for since it's already in a Python environment. I'm not sure there's a need for what Grump gives you, but Gulp gives you something that we don't have.
No, I'm on board with using Gulp. Like I would much rather do that than us trying to invent our own Python-based dev tools for JavaScript.
Uh-huh.
That sounds like not fun.
Cool. I think that's everything.
Okay.
Oh, but what was the Strata NYC? Did I miss? Did we talk about that at all, or did it?
I'm most likely going to go, but the talk deadline has passed, and I didn't want to give a talk yet again. So I'm talking to them to see if we can do a booth there.
Okay, and I think I remember Fernando said he was going with you to Seattle, didn't he? You didn't put him on the hackpad here.
What's
That
that?
might have that would happen.
Again?
I think that already happened. I don't think that was PyData.
I can't hear.
Oh, okay, got it.
Okay.
That's it, I think, right? We're done.
Yeah. As far as I know,
I think I might be frozen.
I can hear you
Brian?
fine. Well, I think we're good.
All right.
Bye, Internet.
I don't know if I can't hear anyone. Bye, Internet.
Well, we can hear Brian just fine.